everyone. We're doing, obviously, the Queer Women of Ice and Fire panel. And if you've read Fire and Blood, you know that now there are plenty of them. Well, a few, at least. And I wanted to do a quick poll. At some point, should we introduce ourselves first, though? I'll start with myself. I'm Ashaya. I do History of Westeros podcast. I'm bisexual, poly, and I identify as they, them just because I feel like we should use gender-neutral terms as much as we can. So, go on.
So I'm Archmaester Aemma. I am bi. I mostly write about the symbolism of A Song of Ice and Fire at miceatplay.wordpress.com. But you can also find me chatting random stuff on Twitter at ELSmith1994.
I'm Melanie Lot7, and I identify as bi. And you can find me on Twitter at Melanie Lot7, but the number, not the word. And also, I have a very small YouTube channel, also Melanie Lot7, and a WordPress site, same.
Hi, I'm Yoshi, also known as Yoshi Targaryen on Twitter. I'm just known for having a big mouth and a lot of opinions, so nice to see everyone here today.
So, okay, this poll we want to do. I wanted to see how many people in the room are show-only watchers. Okay, a few. Okay, good to know. How many of you have not read Fire and Blood? Okay, cool. So we know to cater that to give you guys some context here, but we are going to be getting into Fire and Blood material at length because that's a lot of the bulk of what we have. But there's still a lot in the stories proper. So should we start with the stories proper, A Song of Ice and Fire, or should we start with the history? Do we want to start with the bad or the good, basically?
Let's just get the bad out of the way.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Let's get that all out of the way here. So I think the two most iconic scene, like in the books that you think of when you think of, same-sex, relations are obviously Cersei and Taena and Daenerys and Irri. And both of those have a lot of power dynamics at play in a really interesting way, right?
Yeah. So taking the Cersei and Taena one, there are some really, really problematic is probably the nicest way you can possibly ever coat that entire dynamic. So for those of you who don't know what it is, Cersei takes on Taena of Myr as a handmaid, and then trigger warnings aplenty in this sort of entire thing. But they start having a sexual relationship, and then Cersei just rapes Taena, explicitly thinking of her own experiences with Robert at that point. So that's really bad.
Also, real quick note, if you have questions throughout this, feel free to raise your hands. We wanted to do Q&A throughout.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking of handmaidens, Daenerys and Irri, that's a whole different dynamic in that it's kind of like, a master and a servant type dynamic, and the power dynamic is just not healthy. And Irri's clearly doing it out of a sense of duty rather than a sense of love. And, that's just kind of sad.
I do appreciate that Daenerys recognizes that, but then she still does
Takes
turn to her.
advantage of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think that in particular with Cersei and Taena, what is fascinating to me is Cersei really grappling with her thoughts about being a man, about how if she'd been born a man, how different things would be with her. And she explicitly thinks about that in all of these scenes, like time after time, she's associating these sexual experiences with her own gender experiences.
And that her lack of agency is built into it too. And, it just turns it uglier.
Yeah, she's exhibiting signs of what Freud would call like penis envy. She just really, really has a problem with her sex. She just wants to have, and I don't think it's a matter of wanting to have a different sex. It's her need for power.
Yes. Yeah. There's one little thing that I noticed when researching this is there's a scene where Cersei talks about that she's lying in the tub, in Taena's arms. And I think that's interesting that they would have like a different kind of intimate moment like that.
It's a more tender moment?
Yeah, it's a more tender moment. And Cersei really starts to think of her like pretty tenderly, actually. beyond, like, she obviously is like, no one can compare to Jaime, but she's still, it's like, Taina's on my side. Taina will be there for me. But I don't know about Taina. So obviously, Dany also has some experiences with Dorea. In the show, we see, we have her handmaids, and in the show, they show Dorea teaching Daenerys about things. That is in the books, but it's, off, screen. We don't actually see what she did. It seemed more like they were talking and showing and not quite, I don't know, it was definitely less graphic.
Words were involved.
Yeah.
Attached to Dorea, too, I mean, she was trained in the ways of the seven sides, and she was essentially a sex slave herself. And, that's, again, the power dynamics there are unhealthy and problematic. And thanks, George, for, giving us these terrible examples first, and then listening to us as consumers of his work, and this time around in Fire and Blood, giving us something better to look at.
Yeah, I really do think that the representation in Fire and Blood was because he gets feedback like that. He does. Like, he can't avoid it. So what are your thoughts on Oberyn and Nymeria Sand? Like, because honestly, there's a little bit of a power dynamic there. They're getting sex workers. They're nobles as well. Like, we don't see their scenes because we don't see their POV, but you have to think that it's a lot of that.
I think that a lot of that comes from the culture north of Dorne. So, it's very taboo north of Dorne to have these kind of intimate relations with same sex or, whatever the case is, polyamorous, interactions. So the only way for them to kind of engage in, their own culture would be to kind of feed into, the culture of the North. So, I know there would be people willing to, but to seek it out, easiest place would be a brothel.
It's true.
Wherever it's available.
I liked the line about Oberyn's talking about Ellaria and how Ellaria thinks he should just marry Cersei just because Ellaria wants to get Cersei in bed. Which
she might have a nasty surprise ahead of her if that ever happened, but...
Of course, we would be remiss if we didn't also talk about Ellaria in the show, where she had a relationship beyond Oberyn, which I think you had a lot to say about that, Yoshi, right?
As far as what was concerned,
we were talking about how Yara, is pansexual in the show, and how her and Ellaria, have some relations with each other and all that, but we also see Yara in a brothel.
It was very, I want to say, a little confusing to see in the show without, any kind of like explanation. The way I saw it was that maybe, Yara is very fond of the Iron Islands. She's very proud to be an Iron Islander. And a lot of their ways is, quote unquote, the old way, which she also takes to heart very much. And I'm not sure if that sexuality was shown on screen because of this old way, or what really was it just, we were missing.
They were like, I don't know. They were like, she looks kind of masculine. Like, she looks like she could be gay. Let's make her gay. I
didn't get that.
Out to me, I don't know.
Yeah, because in the books, we don't have any of that information.
No, we see her interested in men specifically in the books.
I wonder if it, maybe had to do with Carl the maid.
Yeah,
in the books, because, he is not typically masculine looking.
Yeah, they could have taken something from that. Maybe giving them too much the benefit of the doubt.
I kind of feel like I'm giving them a little bit too much credit.
So we have a few other characters here in Dorne to talk about there's not a lot of meat there, but there's some to wonder about, I think, right?
I just want to really quickly interject that especially the depiction on the show, I feel like is really just this hedonistic type view of Dorne that to me is problematic because it skips any kind of like actual emotion and just makes it into this like hedonistic type thing where, you're just going into like this brothel and just engaging in this debauchery, and it doesn't take anybody's emotions or feelings into account. And I don't know, I think that's kind of just shallow.
Yeah, it feels very much like a sort of cheap way of going, ooh, look at these people, aren't they exotic?
Exactly.
Don't do that, please stop.
Yeah, I definitely, one of the things I would like to see in the series is just, just romance, just a pure romance that isn't just about sex. Yes, I very much want that, and we do get some of that in Fire and Blood, but again, they're not POVs. We're not in their head, like, experiencing, like, their feelings. Okay, so in Dorne, there's we have Nymeria Sand, right? And this one was one that, like, intrigues me. I mean, you could read it whatever way you want, but my standard for headcanons is if you don't know, like, explicitly what it is, just choose what you want to believe. Like, you can just go with it. So we hear that Nymeria was abed with the Fowler twins when word reached her. And then we eventually learn their names in A Dance with Dragons, a book later, that they're Jeyne and Jenelyn. So she was abed with two twins. Well, women do have handmaids that they would sleep with, like, in bed. But I like to think that, she was having a little threesome with those Fowler twins. I would prefer to think that. And then a weirder one, right, is Rhaena and Nymeria Sand, I think, where, like, clearly you could, they have some connection there, but they're closely related also. But like, also Arianne fantasizes about Oberyn, her uncle. So
yeah.
Apparently she doesn't care as much about that.
The tiny bit of Targ.
Tiny bit of Targ. They did marry in there, so yeah. That's great. Yeah. So you guys touched on already just the sex position in the show and all the same-sex brothel work, but boo.
Yeah, I really just want to go off about the show's main framing of queer women relationships seeming to just always taking place in a brothel because, there's a sex position in season 1, episode 7, where you've got Roz and she's coming down and she's training to be a sex worker, and then you've got Doreah as a former sex slave, and then you've got Yora's sexuality, which is shown in the context of sex work in Volantis, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Then you've got Ilaria and Oberyn introduced in the context of sex work. And, like, queer female sex workers, especially sex workers of colour, were absolutely essential to the Pride movement, and they're so historically important. But, like, it's not the only representation of women. It's certainly not there to be exploitative. And the show definitely feels like that at times for me. I don't know about you guys, but stop.
Hardly
Definitely. Like, there are Summer Islanders in Westeros, for one, who these people, they worship gods through acts of love sexually. And they spend at least a year there worshiping their god by letting anyone have sex with them. So it was really weird not to see that because we have Summer Islanders and they're people of color. Also, Dorne. Like, there was so much that they could have done.
I know. I have to say, when they didn't cast Ariane Martell and all that, I'm like, this is perfect for HBO, though. Like,
it really is.
It's like, she is a perfect character for what they're doing, I have to say, like, just straight up.
Yeah.
If only they had more female writers on their show.
Or any would be good.
Yes.
So I'm sure we'll still have to reference some of this negative stuff, but I'm raring to get into the more positive stuff. I think.
Let's talk about happy things.
So basically, it seems like a lot of you haven't read Fire and Blood. There's the World of Ice and Fire too, and that gave us, we got one of these characters in there too, but Fire and Blood, you gotta go out and read it. That's all I can really say. If you've read the books, you should read the history. It's fascinating. But I think I want to start with the two standout characters, which are Rhaena Targaryen and Elissa Farman.
Yes, please.
Which there's so much to say here, so much to rave about. I'll let you guys get started. Go down the line.
I cried.
I was so happy, absolutely. And I'm sorry, but Elissa is the queen of my heart. Yes, she's one of my favorites, and
Just
I
think
love
about
her.
it. The first person to circumnavigate the Planetos, the globe, was a gay woman. Not just a woman, a gay woman.
A gay woman.
Fuck yeah.
About time.
But see, I also think this is interesting because you really do see a bit of the romance. You're not in their eyes, but you see that they're, very tied to each other, right?
Yeah.
A really humanizing quality bit about the relationship between Rhaena and Elissa that I really liked had to do with, not to bring it down, but had to do with their quarreling about money as Elissa wanted to build the Sun Chaser. Basically, they were arguing about money, and that's like the most mundane relationship thing ever, where you're just like, I want to spend my money on this. No, you can't do that. And I really liked that dynamic, and I felt it was so humanizing. And the other side of the coin is that Elissa, I was wondering if Rhaena was preventing Elissa from building this ship, because Rhaena knew that she had duty to take care of, and she was rooted to this place. And if Elissa left, then she would be left alone. And that kind of breaks my heart, when one partner has wanderlust and the other one is tied to a place in duty. And it's kind of sad because it ended up breaking them apart. But, that's also a really relatable thing that, humans just have to deal with that. And I really like that aspect of it.
One thing that really interested me about Rhaena was, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you guys, I identify as bisexual, pronouns she, her. So one thing I found very interesting was that she was married twice. She had children. And I was wondering if, this was a sense of duty, or if it was that she actually had feelings for men as well, the way she did for Elissa, because we know a little bit of context here. She was married. It was to...
She was married to
Aegon.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Maegor
they seemed like they had a fine relationship.
Yeah, and they had a pretty, I would say fine, but
they grew up together. They were Targaryen.
Yeah, that was expected of them. It was in their culture to do that. So I wonder if if all this was a sense of duty, or if she really had feelings for men. So,
of course, immediately after this, she goes through incredibly traumatic experiences throughout all of this, which has to affect her in a lot of ways, obviously. I do not think that affects her sexuality, because we hear very early on about her favorites.
Right.
Which, shout out to the movie The Favorite. But no, the first time I was reading, they're like, her current favorite, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, she's gay.
And there's a line later on where Alysanne very kindly offers to marry Rhaena off, because that's just what you want. And then Rhaena's immediate response is, that only served to bring a snarl to Rhaena's lips. She snatched her hand away from the Queen Alysanne's, and said, I fed my last husband to my dragon. If you make me take another, I may eat you myself. So I think that's about as vehemently no to men as you can possibly get.
I mean, I definitely know she married Andrew, which was Elissa's brother, because she definitely wanted to be close to Elissa.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very telling, that you were willing to marry a man just to, be close to this person.
The most lavender marriage ever.
But so we see obviously a kind of a bevy of women. Rhaena has a squad, let's say, and I have to we're not in these scenes. We're not seeing their point of view, so we don't know who had relationships with each other and who was just friends, because it's not like they're all just sleeping together. Like,
can't assume.
You can't assume that. But there's a few ones that she starts with, that she's closest to, like Larissa Valerian. I think that was probably one of her first, maybe, which, makes sense. They would have been close. She would have been, she's Valerians, and, for context, the Valerians and the Targaryens are, pretty close like that. They marry in tightly. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about the descriptions of any of these women. and their like relationships with each other.
Yeah, well-
Obviously, there's one that you have to want to talk about, Melanie.
Yeah, Melanie Piper. Yeah, I can't help it. Whenever I see the name Melanie in the book, I'm just like, ah! Thanks, George. Just glad to be represented. Even though you spelled it wrong. But yeah, Melanie Piper is like a warrior maid. She's hanging out in her armor, looking so fine. And, she's martial, and I'm sure she was very fit and lovely. But yeah, I think it's really interesting because not only was Melanie Piper one of her lovers, but I believe Larissa was like described as big boned.
Oh, that's Sam Stokeworth.
I'm
Big
sorry.
and boisterous.
Big and boisterous. Okay.
Which I'm glad it like describes her personality a little bit too. As a lot of these girls, we don't actually get what their personality is at all, which is, a problem. But I would like to, know a little bit about them. But at least a couple of them we know.
Yeah.
I really like that Melanie, even though it seems like their relationship like broke off in the sort of teen years, I really love that they continued a really close friendship, and Melanie was always there, and she like turned up when her Rhaena's brother husband was like making his claim on the throne. Melanie turned up with an army to explicitly support Rhaena. So it's really
Faithful to the end.
yeah, and it's really lovely to like finally have some representation of, women loving women who are supporting each other even after the relationship has ended. And it's just I really just like the fact that he's included that as opposed to catty sisters.
So
Exactly.
I want to go over real quick the favorites that we hear of, just to list them off for you guys. We've mentioned Melanie Piper. We've mentioned Larissa Valerian, who it was her very first of her favorites, and she went back, to Tarth, where Larissa Valerian had moved to and married into. So maybe one of the last of her favorites as well, the first and the last, perhaps. So I would be very interested to learn about that. We talked about Sam Stokeworth and Alyssa Farman, but we haven't mentioned there's also Elaine Royce.
Yeah.
Which, again, very little to say on her, but we did hear another description of looks, not personality, a plump and homely girl.
Isn't that what matters the most? I mean, like...
Okay. But I guess the person writing Fire and Blood knew what she looked like.
George.
I think it's really interesting, you guys, that just that Rhaena took them flying on Dreamfire, right?
I mean, who wouldn't want to do that?
Maybe, I don't know if I would.
Yeah, I don't think plunging to my death would be a great date, but
I'm in for it. I'm ready to go Dragon back.
Let's see.
can we get into Sarah?
Yeah, let's get into Sarah. That's a real fun topic, I think, too.
her.
You want to start us off with that, then?
An amusing story.
Yeah. So Saera Targaryen. Where do we start with her? She was known as a young child to, know how to get her way. Very, very willful, let's say. Where would we say her? They start to begin to learn about her sexuality.
I don't like it. It comes out because obviously they all get caught having.
Right.
Coming
So
of age
they
story.
list off her favorites as well. And it's a pack of it's 3 girls, 3 guys.
Yeah.
And it comes out because we have a knight who finds the 3 lads at a brothel, and they were laughing at the fool because they wanted to see how he would do with other, let's say, ladies. I don't want to say other word. And when Queen Alysanne goes over to the girls, now she's questioning the girls. She doesn't give them the pretext to what she's questioning them about. She tells them, your friends are in the dungeon, and if you don't give me the truth of this, you'll wonder where you'll be sleeping tonight too. And so the girls start going off, not knowing what she was talking about, and say, oh, it only started as a game. We were just kissing with our clothes on at first, and then our clothes off after. And it comes out that one of the girls are pregnant, and they have to marry her off immediately. And it started this whole big charade where Saera had to answer for all of this. And she basically tells her father, like, he asked her, did you give your maidenhead to one of these guys? And she's like, oh, I slept with all three. All of them thought they were the first. I don't know who I'm going to marry. Maybe I'll marry this one. He makes me scream. Sometimes he makes me laugh. And just how forward she was with all of this information that was considered very taboo. I loved it. She was just like shattering glass ceilings.
Can I read the quote?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have, Saera was teaching Alice how to kiss. So I asked if she would teach me too. The boys train at fighting every morning, so why shouldn't we train at kissing? That's what girls are meant to do, isn't it? And I don't know, I just love that. That's what girls are meant to do, right? Right?
So she ends up, I don't know if I'm skipping anything right now. Everything just comes to memory as I go. But she ends up leaving King's Landing. They send her over to Old Town, where she served for about a year. I think it was as a
pretty short time.
And then
Didn't work out.
she knocked over her sister and fled. Her sister was also there serving as a SEPTA. And no one could find her in Westeros. And she turns up about 5 years later in Lys.
Yeah.
And in Lys, she is working at a pleasure garden or a pleasure house. And she actually rises from that, and she has her own, what they call a palace. So she basically rose up, made a lot of money, I'm assuming, to be running her own brothel. So she didn't want to even come claim, the seat, because she said, why would I go there if I have a palace here, So, and she was free to do what she wanted there. She loved sex. She loved her body. She loved other people. And she wasn't going to let anybody tell her otherwise. And I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like reading through the tone of like the male Archmaester being very hoity-toity and prudish about it. It's actually a really strong, here is a queer woman using her sexuality to empower herself in a way that really suits her. And I think that's a really inspiring way to look at it if you can ignore Gildane's tone.
I liked how he was so appalled by it. I was like, in your face, So.
Okay, so I want to talk for a minute about, I think, one of my favorite it's very subtle, it's not mentioned, it's at length, but it's Jeyne and Jessamine Redford. Jeyne Eyre, it was known as the Maiden of the Vale, and we've known that for a long time. But in Fire and Blood, we discovered that, I'll read this quote. Septon Eustace repeats the widespread rumor that Jeyne Eyre preferred the intimate companionship of other women, but then goes on to say it was not true. Well, I'm going to believe it's true. And then we find out later.
Intimate companionship was so clinical.
Yeah, like she's the Maiden of the Vale. Like she never marries. Like, okay. But then it goes on later. We find out that Jeyne Eyre eventually dies in the mother house of Maris, wrapped in the arms of Jessamine Redford, her dear companion. So I think it's like a rare tale where like they had a life together. No one got in their way. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very sweet.
Yeah, because the Lady Jeyne Eyre, I loved the fact that she never married and still held her seat with no one telling her anything. Like, she sent Rhaena all these troops, and she got into the middle of this war, the Dance of the Dragons, and it was just, like, amazing. Like, I loved that she did not get married. I just really loved that she didn't need a man in her castle to say, all right, this is what's going to be done. Mm-hmm. And I say it, I will it, and that's it.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, they also mentioned she had a cousin who was a man, and he defended her loyally, and she named him her heir, but he was, he wasn't like the kind of guy that was like, she's gay and I can maybe oust her or something. Mm-hmm. Like, she had some loyal people around her, clearly, people that would defend her. I think, let's see, we could talk about Sabitha, Viper and Frey, I think, perhaps now. She's the one that we did learn in The World of Ice and Fire originally. She's the OG. Of course, okay, I'll read this quote. I just like the description of her. I don't know. I think she's basically like a Frey Olenna is what I picture. I don't know. But it goes, Sabitha Frey, the lady of the twins, the widow of Lord Forrest Frey and mother of his heir, a sharp-featured, sharp-tongued harridan of House Viperin, who would sooner ride than dance, wore mail instead of silk, and was fond of killing men and kissing women, according to Mushroom. So that's a great quote about her. I just... There's so many characters in this book that I just want to explore more.
It's so nice to hear a description through Mushroom's point of view as opposed to Gildane's point of view. That's a little bit livelier, a little bit less clinical.
Yeah.
Yes. I something that slipped by me, I think, the first time I read Fire and Blood, honestly, I just totally didn't take notice of it for once, was this stuff about Black Alley Blackwood. Any of you want to speak to that?
Oh. Yeah, just about how during the war, which war was this again? So many wars. During the war, they would share the tent together, and everyone thought they were related because, they were so close. But nobody really delved that deep into that relationship for some reason. I guess it was just way too much going on in the fray. But they... definitely shared a tent together, so make of that what you will.
And of course, Black Alley Blackwood eventually marries Cregan Stark, but hey, she can be pan or bi, why not? Yeah, just believe what you want. And we hear that many thought her to be of the same ilk as Sabitha Frey, for they were oft in one another's company, and as you said, had been known to share a tent. So we have the information. Just believe what you want. If you want to think Black Alley, and Sabitha had a thing, yeah. I love it.
Between the lines. Yeah. Why not?
Pink wash everything.
I think after Rhaena and Elissa, I think my favorites are Sylvena Sand and Essie.
Me too.
Yeah. You want to start us off with them?
Sure. So they are sex workers, and they proclaim their adopted son, I'm assuming? I'm not sure if it was a biological son.
I think he's a biological son, but not with an actual Targaryen.
Yeah, okay. He just has the Targaryen look. But anyway, his name is Gaiman Palehair, and they raised him up. But what they ended up doing, kind of using him as a puppet to force through their own really liberal policies. I was just so happy to see that happen. And I was like,
yeah, they took that opportunity quickly. Like, as soon as the queen was gone, they were like, hey, we got a Targaryen here.
Yeah.
I
want to read this quote. These are the edicts that they decreed, and they're just so good.
They're wonderful.
Gaiman decreed that girls should henceforth be equal with boys in matter of inheritance, that the poor be given bread and beer in times of famine, and that men who had lost limbs in war must afterward be fed and housed by whichever lord they had been fighting for when the loss took place. Gaiman decreed that husbands who beat their wives should themselves be beaten, irrespective of what the wives had done to warrant such chastisement.
So progressive, it makes me happy.
I also love that George described it as a queer kingdom. And it was just...
He also named him Gaiman.
It's not subtle, George.
No.
But it's effective. It's effective.
No.
I love that the kid was 5 too, so he had no idea what was going on. He was like,
hey. Yeah, sure, Mom.
And they were like, come on, we need this. Yeah.
And of course, it was a Dornish woman with the sand last name that would have been pushing this forward. You caught one here too that I actually didn't grab originally.
So there are another 3 Jeynes. So they went to the Maiden's Fair. So Aegon III, his sister wife died, and they were looking for another wife for him. And then 3 Jeynes attended this Maiden's Fair, which was a massive ball for him to pick a wife. And there's a brief quote about them that says, "And it was put about that the 3 Jeynes, Jane Smallwood, Jane Mutton, and Jane Merryweather, liked to dress in squire's garb and visit the brothels along the Street of Silk, to kiss and fondle the women there, as if the 3 of them were boys." So yeah, obviously it's very, very queer, and they're going along and enjoying themselves in life.
Yeah. A lot of Janes are gay, I guess.
Yeah, seems to be a popular name. I don't know.
So as you can see, he added a lot. Like, it's a good amount of characters that he added, but with a lot of them, there's not a lot of personality. There's not a lot of feelings in there. So I'm really curious for the Winds of Winter if he's gonna continue this. If we saw in Fire and Blood that he did better, if he will take this into account for that.
Yeah.
And I wonder, just based on the response that he's getting from people like us, I wonder if that's going to figure into that.
Yeah.
The positive, response that he's getting. I really hope so.
Really? Something I do at conventions when I, ask, George a question, I get a Q&A. Sometimes I'm like, I should ask a question about a character that I would care about a lot, just so he's like reminded that we care. So basically, I think I should ask him about like Elissa or one of these gay women. He'll be like, oh, okay. Like people are into
hoping
this.
he didn't forget. And I think D&D should be held a little bit liable too, since like they're gonna change all this stuff in the show. Why not go in that direction and have representation on the show when you have? I mean, there's not a lot, like we're picking some bones here, like we want this representation, but like you said, it's HBO, it's perfect. Like, why would you not go in that direction and give us some representation there? Like, you changed so much else, like, made me a little upset.
I guess they probably gave us it with Ilaria and Yara.
Yeah.
You have something? Oh, okay. We haven't gotten a single comment throughout this. Here we go.
And this is me being incredibly cynical.
Yeah.
Please bear with me. I've been out for a really long time, and I've seen and heard everything. There's a part of me that wonders sometimes if people don't include the gay characters because it draws more of an audience.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hear what you guys.
I mean, that couldn't be the reason for Game of Thrones, because they want that. You know what I mean? Like, they explicitly would, that's what they want. So, those are my thoughts, basically, is that you would think they would put more of it in there just because of that, by that measure. But I will say, like, for the books, for example, George has explicitly, when people have asked, why isn't there, like, on screen, on book, like, we see men having sex together, he'd be like, because I'm not interested in that, I don't know how to write it. And you're like, but you write as a young girl, or like, you can do that, like you can't write a gay love scene, you can write a lesbian love scene, like I don't get it. That's like a cop-out. So like there is this element of that for sure.
Really graphic with Eerie and Danny. So I mean, it's possible you can do it. Like, or even like, I'm sure you have like a community that is willing to give those insights, like everybody's willing to talk about, their experience, especially with being, LGBTQ, where we're in an era where it's like people don't want to listen, so when you get the opportunity, people are gonna, come out and give their feedback. So
Yes.
Do you also think that it's partially to do with the fact that there were no men in the writers' room? Because I think there are 6 queer characters in the show, but 4 of them are men. And that's where the most of the storyline comes in with Renly and Loras.
Yeah, Renly and Loras and Olivar, you would count Oberyn, obviously. And then you have Ilaria, Yara, and you would, I don't know how you would count the Dany, Dorius. I don't know what to say about that.
Quasi.
Or the sex worker. I don't know. All that. So it depends on how you count. Like maybe you count some of those sex workers, and I don't think I do personally, because who knows their thoughts on it all.
Yeah, they don't get a choice.
Yeah, they don't get a choice. Yeah.
Those scenes are shot are just so like that it shies in. The male-directed porno.
Yeah, it's all directed to it's all directed towards the male gaze. Absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing there for women. There's no tenderness. There's
nothing at all.
Anybody else here? Yeah.
So I'm asexual and aromantic. I was just wondering, and I know Varys comes to mind as a unit. That is asexual. Are there any characters that you all refer as ace or arrow? I was thinking that. But it's more sociopathic. Is it brothels at all?
Yeah.
He can very easily, I feel like, find a sexual partner if he wanted. He's so sneaky.
But he's just so fixated on Catelyn and Sansa, which he's like very fixated
he's, like,
on them, but it's not like, I mean, he's just this obsessive, you know,
Frustrated with Catelyn, you think he would try to like release that tension in some way.
I've always read Stannis as Ace because he, you know, goes to the bedchamber like a man going to battle or what.
And doesn't seem to particularly enjoy his encounters with Melisandre either. Like,
that feels very much like or I've always read it as very much like he's using that as a tool to, you know, gain
means to
his
an end.
kingdom. And much like, you know, going to Selyse is his duty to get an heir, but it doesn't. So I've always read Stannis as Ace.
I definitely see that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Vegan, yeah.
We'll learn.
Interested in books.
It's like, I just want my books.
I wanted to add, a lot of people read from Blackfishes as
Oh, that's a great, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that, for sure.
The comment was that Brynden Blackfish is also can be read as Ace.
Yeah, you could read him as Ace, you could read him as gay. You could,
got into arguments with Hoster about whether or not he was going to marry him, like self-exiled to the veil.
He was like, nope.
Here's my statement, and I'm sticking to it.
He ran away from home just so he wouldn't get married.
There's nothing wrong either. I mean, you know. The fan in the
Also, post Rhaena and Bran.
I actually was going to bring that up, possibly. Never seemed to have a romantic partner, so
that is interesting. You're talking about Bran, right?
I was talking about the three-eyed. I was talking about Bran, not the three-eyed.
Yeah,
Raven.
but yes.
I mean, but Bran is very
I had a
young.
really late night last night, guys. Don't even know what I'm saying right now.
I mean, if we were talking about book, Bran is still very young, and he doesn't have like much experience. He's just fighting for survival. So, but Three-Eyed Raven,
you know,
Bran,
a budding.
Yeah, you would think like going through puberty, he would be like, "Hey, Mira," but we haven't seen any of that.
Sense.
Yeah, it's true.
To that, but.
I think I remember that. She is like, I think fondly of Mira.
I got a vibe, like, in as much, I'm not like a shipper in general, but like, they're just a sweet, like, she's guarding him, and I think they're really sweet friendship, and, you know, they're young and all that, but I really wanted to see Mira again in the show, and for her to, like, show up there in King's Landing, like, Bran's king now, like, go see her, I don't know. But it is, like, I do wonder, Bran, is he gonna get married as king? I know that's all the show, but, like, if we're assuming that's gonna happen in the books, too, like, not that we'll get that answer, but it's just something I never thought about, is if Bran would actually have a I don't know, I don't think so.
Can he produce children?
Yeah, but
is
like,
another
you don't have to be able
one.
to produce children to necessarily like want a companion like that. Yeah. But he's very, you know, just I don't think he would.
Yeah,
So
he's
you
like
could
really
say that at
disassociated from reality.
Yeah, at the point that he, you know, is the three-eyed raven, I guess he would be considered asexual, but it's a very different sort of thing.
Magical.
I mean, yeah, he said,
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't want for anything. I don't want to be Lord of Winterfell."
Yeah.
But he's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll be king. That's what I came here for." Like,
He's just apathetic.
so
in
maybe he could
general.
still want something. Like, I don't.
And also might be getting into like this territory where disabled people don't have sexuality.
That's
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, you're broken, you don't feel anything anymore.
Oh no, not to say that. I'm sorry. No, just like physically, since he's handicapped, you know, we don't know how far down and what necessarily works.
Yeah, just to repeat for anyone who's listening back on the audio, for anyone who didn't hear that, that was a really important comment about, the representation of disabled people and sexuality, and disabled people being perceived as not particularly sexual, which is incorrect. Don't
Very
automatically think that.
incorrect.
do not assume friends.
Okay. I know it's getting a bit off topic, but in terms of disability, at the end in the last episode, Tyrion says that Bran can't father children, and I'm wondering what your opinion is on why is that. Like my wife and my son are both disabled, and like my wife and really pissed my wife off. Like, why could he not level up?
Yeah.
I mean, what would your guess be on why he couldn't?
My guess would be that they don't know. Like, how can there
I mean, seriously, are they doing an experiment?
They don't know. Yeah.
In Western society is assuming like, oh, you're broken, so you're
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's totally untrue. We see with Tyrion, like, he has no problems. Like,
What did you have to say, Butterfly, real quick?
I think they basically assume that because of his prowess,
Yeah.
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 I guess the age
Yeah.
makes it a little unhealthy.
There's also, if I'm going to go off topic slightly and talk, so I mostly write about symbolism in A Song of Ice and Fire, and there's a huge overlap in sort of a loss of fertility and sort of castration motifs being associated with magical transcendence. So I think that is probably the most likely background to it, but it does reinforce some pretty problematic notions in relation to disability and gender and sexuality. So
I'm really glad you brought that up because it does. It brings in like a dynamic that I think George is working towards, you know, but it does bring problems into it.
Yeah.
We've got about 4 minutes left. Yeah, go ahead.
An interesting thing is trans character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In they book,
Mm-hmm.
people, I mean, Saera Sand
Yeah.
is, you know, acting as a male,
Yeah.
in no time and not. And it could be just a woman's dressing.
Yeah, just to hide. Yeah.
That some people refer.
We're not in her head. We can just choose what you want to believe. Again, just we're not. We're never gonna have a Sorella POV. We're never gonna know the answer to that question. Yeah, I guess you could be like, I identify. Like, yeah.
Surprise!
The more problematic ones, like the Lannister king, who's like to dress as a woman and go down and die.
Yeah, we've got some that are like, you know, like I don't know how you would read them as more gender fluid, like Lysano Mar, you know, who wears, you know, I know who's to say exactly his perspective on that, but there's a little bit of that.
Yeah. For reference for the recording, that was a comment about like trans characters, and with reference to Sorella Sand, Alaras, and.
Thank you so much, Emma, for remembering to do that. I always try to remember to do this in my panels, and I always forget.
There's also the Jogos Nai, which is a culture in the east of Essos, and they have you can
Moon singers?
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the moon singers. I think it's called Jogo Niet. Jack.
Yeah.
Wait, say that one more time.
It's really hard to pronounce. So it's
Yeah.
called JH.
Yeah.
AT Jats, and then the women's are like Jatas or Jata. The High King. There we go.
But it's a very dichotomized society in which there is a sort of militarized side of it and a religious side of it. And the religious side of it is codified as predominantly female. However, if you were born with a penis, then you can choose to become part of the sort of female-coded sort of religious side of things if you wanted to, and similarly vice versa for people born with a vagina. They could choose to join the militarized side of it, which is coded masculine. So there are cultures in Planetos that do allow for sort of explicit trans identities.
The part I liked about the Jogos was that their first Jatar, their king of kings, who like unified them all to fight somebody, was a woman who had chosen the life of the warrior via Dorspace. Horses are
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, those zebra horses. We're at our end right now, so we got to wrap this up. But if you haven't seen on the schedule, there is the LGBTQ plus panel tomorrow, I believe. I think I'm cross-scheduled and can't go to it, but hopefully you guys will be going to it and to meet more people.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming.